Hi everyone. Today we'll be asking the question, what is your Jamstack? My name is Akshay Sura and I'll be going through this, answering this question with you. So Jamstacks, so the JAM, so JavaScript, APIs and markup make up Jamstack. Jamstack is a modern architecture of web development based on client-side JavaScript, reusing APIs and markup, which is how you push stuff out to your browser. Now, we've all used JavaScript. I mean, anyone who's used websites, as long as I can think of, JavaScript has been something which is used on the client side. So there's nothing new. The concept still exists. JavaScript is still widely used. Nowadays, we have quite a few libraries which are able to use all of the browser's capability. Our modern browsers are capable of a lot more than they did even 10 years ago. So they're able to use as much as possible of these browser capabilities in order to give the best experience for the end user. And you also have to remember that over the years, the browsers have, we have regular standards being set, all the browsers following it. It's no longer like it used to be like 15 years ago or 20 years ago where one browser had this, the other browser didn't have that. There's very few differences between each browsers nowadays. The second part is the API. So this has, there was always APIs, as long as I can remember. You were able to consume things via the API, but also APIs have developed so much in the last couple of decades where there's standard way to do API, standard way to do authentication for the API, standard response objects and formats. So they've grown up a lot, and pretty much every company which is providing a service is now able to provide a reusable API which you can access via your JavaScript to do things, manipulate images, show up a commerce cart, be able to render a product, for instance, from another service. So that quite a bit has changed. And then comes markup. All websites render, markup, which is HTML, and this can be generated. So depending on Jamstack doesn't mean static websites 100% of the time. You could still have an element of server-side functionality if you use things like next.js with React, for instance. There is capability of doing server-side rendering as well. But most of the time, we end up just generating a static site. As you know, static site is much, much faster than anything server-side you could run. So it helps. And you have to realize at some point that we live in an API world. Jamstack might not be the best answer for every scenario you're looking for, but it's a great answer for most of the scenarios, is the best way I can put it. Now, again, why Jamstack? We talked a little bit about Jamstack just now. We want to know what makes it so interesting. What makes Jamstack interesting for someone like me when I'm looking at proposals, or when a customer comes up with an issue they're facing, is that you're able to pick different solutions depending on what the customer needs or what problem we're trying to solve. And as I mentioned, Jamstack isn't the answer all the time, but it could be the answer most of the time if we really look into it. So one of the biggest things about Jamstack is the cost. You're basically hosting a static site. So think about the cost implications, think about the scaling, think about the development, think about the local environments, think about the different environments. So development, QA, user acceptance testing, production. How much do these environments currently cost you? How much do you think they would cost you if you were to just do a static site? I bet you if you did a static site, the cost of your hosting, just hosting alone, would drop drastically. Now that cost benefit goes into different things. So when we talk about cost for Jamstack, it's not just the hosting cost. You can't just look at the development cost. So what it lends itself to is, depending on what your team is well versed in. If they are good at React, they could use React. If they're good at Vue, they can use Vue. If they're good at something else, they could use that. You're giving the freedom basically to your development team. So sometimes we run into these issues where we have customers who have a couple of different teams and we are working alongside with them. So doesn't necessarily mean we always get to code their website 100% of the time, or even 100% of it. But this gives freedom for one of their departments who's great at Vue, for instance, just to pick it up, consume the headless API, build a site by themselves within a short period of time. So the cost of building, the cost of hosting, the cost of ownership, which is really important. What does cost of ownership mean? What are the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly running costs? API subscriptions, hosting, things of that sort, play a big role into this. So I think it makes a big difference. The second one is simplicity. I feel like the more I do sites on Jamstack, it comes very naturally and it's very, very simple. There's not a lot of complicated things going on. Things, some of them are pre-built. The availability of these APIs and what you can do with them, the SDKs available with it, which are giving you the ability to build sites much faster. The simplicity, excuse me, the simplicity is amazing. When we come to security, there's a lot Jamstack cuts as part of, in terms of like moving parts. It makes it easier. As I said, it generates a static site, with JavaScript, which is using APIs to do things dynamically on your site. What is there to attack? So instantly, if you're having subscriptions to these things like Cloudflare or Akamai to do, blocking intrusion stuff, intrusion testing, DDoS attacks, things of that sort, it helps you quite a bit in terms of security because you don't have a lot of vulnerabilities to take care of at this moment. So it helps quite a bit. And I think the simplicity plays into this as well. So it just helps you. Scaling, I just can't speak enough about scaling. So we use Netlify quite a bit. Again, it's a static site. If you want to scale, if you want to push it to different regions, before scaling up an environment for something like a .NET website is hard, whether you're doing it as an app service or a virtual machine. Think about the cost, time, and the things you need to do that, as opposed to this where you're able to push it to different networks, have CDNs in play. You can cache it as much as you can. Redundancy, the load capacity just is very, very scalable. Talks to the next part, which is makes it very performant. Page loading speeds are amazing in Jamstack because you're lean and mean, and you are able to take a bunch of load coming onto your site because you can serve them so fast. Everything is cached, so there's not a lot of back and forth. There's the APIs you're dealing with are with these third-party vendors or even your own, so it makes it extremely easy. You don't have to have expensive infrastructure or complex infrastructure to do this. Things are already set up for you if you use a provider like Netlify, or you could even do it on AWS and Azure, whoever you choose. Maintainability. So we're reducing the complexity in different sections for this, right? So if you take hosting, if you take performance, scaling, security, everything is getting less complex. So maintaining becomes a lot easier if you wanted to do switch out sites with a new version, depending on which headless CMS you're using. Things become quite easy. In the future videos, we are going to show you how easy it is to build a completely new functionality, a new site, and be able to switch back and forth between your old and new site in seconds. Like, it's just crazy how easy it is to maintain, how easy it is to build. I think being able to patch things, update, and maintain a site is extremely easy. Portability, again, the sites are all statically generated. You can host them wherever you want. You can plug and play your headless CMS API provider if you like. You could, pick one, push the other. It just makes it quite easy. You're not locked into a specific infrastructure provider. You could switch relatively easily. Developer experience. This is something interesting. So I've been on the .NET stack all my life, and it's kind of, it was a big thinking push for me to move from a .NET stack to a Jamstack. I resisted it for the longest time. But what you have to realize is there's different variety of tools you can use to build Jamstack. You don't have to fall in like one thing. So for instance, as a .NET developer, I knew I spent probably most of my time in Visual Studio. That's pretty much all I did. But with the Jamstack sites, you pick what you want to work in, what you're most comfortable with. You're not, locked into proprietary technologies. You're not, just pigeonholed into one framework. You have widely available tools. You have widely available conventions you can use to build these sites. There's a lot of developers out there who are really good, React developers who can easily pick up next.js, for instance, which is the framework. So availability of developers, just the developers being effective, is just crazy. Extensibility, again, just as the more we look into it, the more you see how much API. For example, we were working with a vendor for something else, and partway through building this site on Jamstack, I realized, wait, you guys also provide, apart from the PIM, you guys also provide headless commerce, and I had no clue. So it was interesting where these companies have built on this newer infrastructure, are able to push this API, are able to give you a lot more than a lot more in terms of API and functionality that you don't realize unless you ask or look. And that was a pleasant experience. And you can extend these Jamstack sites to your heart's content depending on which all different frameworks you're looking into, the providers you're looking into, the languages you're looking into. And that brings us to the last two points, which I'm going to be a little bit brief. But to me, once I understood what we were trying to do, it was very, very simple for us to have a standardized setup for our development and be able to, it was lean. We didn't need these heavy machines. They were pretty light. It's not consuming your resources like crazy. So if you have a decent machine, there is no requirement for you to have a beefy machine for development or use. You're able to spin up these sites on localhost pretty easily, run. They don't consume a lot of resources. There's a lot of documentation. This was something which I was extremely happy with. Is traditionally, from the systems I come from, you have to rely on a lot of blog posts in order to get your documentation or figure out how things are happening, or decompile DLLs to figure it out. But in this Jamstack, which we were working in, the specific stack, I was able to find answers without even stepping out of the, whatever the technology we were using. And that was amazing to me because I didn't have to look for something, and it has a double-edged sword, right? I didn't have to write anything as a blog post to say, hey, this is how you do it. because it's already pretty well documented. So I think documentation is a great piece of that. And this, after the amount of time we spent on this, which is at least the last 6 months, trying different combination, asking questions, like, can I do this with .NET? Because we're mainly .NET developers. Yes, you can. You can do it with .NET. Like, what do I get? What do I not get? So what we started off with a list of requirements, what we need to serve our customers, what we need when we look at RFPs of what's happening. And when we did that, we went through, every time we thought, we found something, we evaluated it using those criteria. And what we realized is one size does not fit all. I can't push everyone in the same, saying this is our Jamstack, you got to stick with it. And that's why this question came about. What is your Jamstack? What is my Jamstack? And one size does not fit all. It is interesting how it doesn't, and we can talk about the differences as well as we're going through, but this is a realization we came to. So today we'll look at the use case we're trying to look at. We're trying to look to create a website and be able to support a native mobile app. Both the website and the mobile app should be able to personalize content. They also need to provide forms for lead gen. Pretty simple, but the mandate is to keep it lean. So keep it lean means several things. The costs need to be as low as you possibly can with paid subscriptions, as well as the site needs to be super fast and it needs to do what it needs to do. Now, when you look at something like that, you have to look at, again, we go into similar things. So we look at cost of development, cost of ownership, which headless CMS are we going to pick? What's going to be the search? How are you going to have analytics on this site? What are you going to use for personalization? And then, what are you going to use for static site generation and why? What's going to be your infrastructure? And last of all, how are you going to implement forms? So what we will do is we'll go through one by one each of these and figure out what the stack is going to be. So let's pick the next one. So cost of development. Now this is interesting. As I mentioned, we went through 6 months of figuring out what is right, what is not. We looked at quite a few things, and what we noted in this, there's so many different frameworks available, so many options available. It truly depends on what your team is good at. If it's something your team needs to build, if it's something the customer's team needs to build, you do have the options. And because of the number of options, it can be overwhelming at first, but once you start looking into it, it makes you more flexible. So depending on your capability, you have the freedom to choose what you want, depending on the cost, which runs into resources. If you need to hire someone who's super expensive for something, or you can hire, you can use in-house talent. Finding a really good, React or Angular or Vue developer is not that difficult. They don't really cost as much as some of the other technologies. So it just makes it easier. So pick what you want, choose your freedom. So the other thing is cost of ownership. We're talking about support, the subscriptions, the different hosting providers we need to deal with, the different environments, the time it's going to take, how much security stuff do we need to work on. Everything comes into cost of ownership from a month-to-month perspective, and it truly depends on what your needs are, how much do you need to scale, who do you need to push to, which regions you need to be in. So again, a lot to consider, but this is a specific criteria we have to meet. For this particular use case, we have different headless CMSs, and we were just amazed at how many there are. There are quite a few. Each has its own positives, each has its own negatives. They're more than positives than negatives. They have a lot of common criteria, which is very, very interesting. if you were to build a site based on markup, you pick your choice. You have a lot more. If you wanted to base it on a headless CMS, then it becomes into a smaller pool, but a pool where things are very common. It depends on the approach you want to take, what you want out of the box, and what you want to build by yourself. And all of them have APIs, which are pretty great. They push back the portable format, which is great. It truly depends on what you're comfortable with. For this, we ended up picking Contentful. So to be really clear, for us, basically Contentful and Content from Kentico were the two top providers, which we loved just because of their UI, the capabilities they offer, and the cost. And Contentful edged out a little bit because their subscription cost for the minimal tier, you could get a community tier. But we talked about this is for a scenario for a customer. We can't operate on a community tier because of we need a solution for a company, not for like a blog, for instance. So Contentful edged out in that in a couple of different things. So we picked that for headless CMS. Great. Next is search. Again, there's several options, to be honest, and it truly depends on what you want to do. Algolia and Elastic are two which are notable. You could build a Google custom search for your website only, which is pretty simple to do, costs nothing, don't have to subscribe to anything. So what we picked was the Google custom search in that regard. Analytics, again, a lot of marketing departments are used to Google Analytics. There's no other way to put it. It's simple. It's been widely used. It's easy to integrate. It's easy to do a lot of things with it. So once you add Google Tag Manager to this equation, you could do a lot more. So this has enabled the marketing teams to track, figure out what's working, what's not working. So, why fix something when it's not broken? So Google Analytics is the only choice I see at this moment for the stack we're trying to create. Personalization. Again, there's quite a few players in the market for personalization. Optimizely is something which I've used in the past. Google Optimize is something we looked at recently. It's free. Again, it's from Google. The features are great. We are having a couple more blog posts coming up which are going to deal with Google Optimize, so you guys will get a chance to see that. So to me, the winner is Google Optimize. We're trying to keep it lean for this use case. So that's what my choice is. Next comes the static generation. This, again, we spent quite a bit of time on this, and it was interesting, the journey we went through, highs and lows. And as I mentioned, as a .NET developer, every option seemed difficult because I have to learn something new, something from scratch. Now, static was the only .NET static site generation, which works really well. It's great. It even has a build pipeline which pushes it to Netlify, so things are easy. You don't need an app service or a virtual server to run something on. So that was a very very appealing choice. But what I do want to say though is that one of the criteria which we came up as a team is we need to have, using the same framework, two options. If I want to run it, if I want to generate static site, yes, I should be able to do that. But if I wanted to run it as a server-side rendering option, I should be able to do that too. And with static, I don't have that option. So unfortunately, that was taken out. Then we fell into the land of the JS static site generation. We landed on next.js and Gatsby, both amazing frameworks to use. But to us, Next edged out just a tad bit more than Gatsby did, just because of its server-side rendering capabilities, how easy it was to do things. So we ended up picking Next because we were a little bit familiar with React. We didn't look at Next, which is a view-based framework, but I maybe in the future for another stack we could pick that. So Next wins out for this specific criteria. Infrastructure, again, on-prem, if you have on-prem servers, or why? You have different options which are free. Netlify comes into play. We've been using them for the past 2 years, and it just simply works. That's the best way I can put it, is it just simply works. You have to think about, what do you do for your current site? Like you have hosting, you have a CDN provider, which is a cost on top of it. You probably have a security appliance or a security provider which sits on top of that. So you're doing so many things. And when you look at infrastructure for a static site generated site, you don't think of all of that. CDN, for something like a Netlify, CDN is included. You don't have to do anything additional. There's no cost. The costs are so low. And again, for any of the things, the criteria we talked about, you could have your own DIY solution for it. I'm not saying you can't, but why build something when there's something already built and super cheap? So for me, Netlify makes absolute sense. The last criteria for us is the forms. We have, again, several options. Forms plays into the lead gen aspect of it. So if you have a form for a form's sake, you have a couple of options. But usually when companies have forms on their site, it's to integrate with their marketing strategy, right? Being able to reach back to their customers after the fact of them pushing a form in. So depending on what you're using, HubSpot, Marketo, Eloqua, Actom, whatever you are using for your marketing efforts, they all have forms you can generate. They all have forms you can embed on your site. There is no reason to rebuild the wheel when it's available. So in our case, it makes sense to use something like a HubSpot, which has free as well as a lower subscription cost. Again, this is just for this specific use case. For me, this works. You can have forms which are GDPR compliant. They flow into storing customers in the background. You can send them messages if you need to after that. There's several other things, right? We're just looking at this use case. We're not looking at digital asset management. We're not looking at headless commerce, the other integrations. How do we migrate an existing site, and ton more, which I'm not mentioning here, which makes sense. But we are taking a use case at this moment, and we are trying to come up with what it would take, what kind of stack would it take to fit the use case. So just before we go to the next slide, I do want to say that yes, there are several other providers for anything you can think of, from headless commerce to digital asset management to integrations. Migrations to these systems are pretty easy. Contentful and Content, for instance, you have migration scripts where you can push and pull information. Again, it's a double-edged sword. All of these are built in such a way that they give you the ability, right? So today I might use push content into Contentful in the content structures I want. Tomorrow I can take that out and push it to Content or another headless provider. It gives you that seamless ability to own your content, to own your stack. You own it. So, flexibility and freedom is something you get. So use it. So where did we land? So we landed here where we have a Jamstack for this use case, which is Contentful. We are going to use Google Analytics. We'll use Google Optimize for personalization. We'll use HubSpot for the forms. You build it using next.js. It'll generate a static site, which will then get pushed into Netlify for hosting. Now you have to remember that you're cutting a lot of cost here in terms of hosting, CDNs, and things of that sort. So what is the cost that we are looking into? This based on the use case, this is what we are coming up with as the cost. And you do have to remember that this isn't for one site. So technically, for the price you're paying for Contentful, you could have multiple spaces if you want, which can host. You could have a global space which has the common data you need, and you could have individual spaces for different websites if you choose to. So you could host multiple sites on this. And when you look at the cost, and I can honestly tell you, it's 6,700 per year isn't even a monthly infrastructure cost we currently spend for some of our customers for the sites we host. And once you look at it from that perspective in terms of ownership, the licensing cost, it's just way too much. And in most of these cases, you are able to cut it to less than that. And that is something which is amazing. Again, as I mentioned, there's so many options available inside of Jamstack. This is the stack I was able to get based on the criteria which we put forward. The cost isn't bad. You could even do on all free tiers if you choose to, right? It truly depends on what your use case is. So use the freedom, build the stack which works for you. Let us know what's your Jamstack. And again, my name is Akshay Sura. You can reach us on all social channels. We're Konabos. We help customers with their marketing and website efforts. Thanks again for watching this video.